Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honour to welcome you this evening to our annual Old Tettenhallians lecture. This lecture was the brainchild of Mr. and Mrs. Wynne, to whom we are very grateful for their inspiration. Tonight's guest speaker is Alexandra Dziegiel, ably assisted by Mr. Tim Beach, who's a parent and governor at the school. My thanks to them both. Alex is the heritage consultant for PCPT Architects. Before receiving her Masters in Conservation from Birmingham City University, Alex spent many years working in historic property management for organisations including English Heritage, Birmingham Museums Trust, and Lichfield Cathedral. She has received honours and awards for conservation research from the National Heritage Ironwork Group and Donald Insall Associates, and the results of her work on the Crooked House pub were published by the Institute for Historic Building Conservation. Her passion lies in uncovering the human stories behind historic buildings and sharing them in ways that bring the past to life. A passion she is delighted to share with Old Tettenhallians tonight. Thank you for your attendance. I hope you enjoy this evening. Let's welcome Alexandra to the stage, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chris. Oh gosh, I don't know who you were talking about, but they sounded jolly impressive. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to speak this evening. I know that last year you had an excellent lecture on Lieutenant Colonel Thornycroft. So this year, I will be focusing, rather than on the man, on the building. So I'd like to start by talking about the development of the towers up to the involvement of the Thornycroft family, because there's almost 100 years of the building before that point. There's quite a lot before the Thornycrofts even got involved. And then I would like to invite you on a virtual tour of the towers as it was in 1891 when the Thornycroft family lived here. First, though, I'll just explain my involvement with the towers. So as Chris said, I work for PCPT Architects, who have been leading on the roof repairs. And I was brought in to write a conservation management plan, CMP, for the building. Now, one of the main purposes of a CMP is to determine the significance of a building. And usually you will find some areas of a building are more significant than others. Now, that significance might be archaeological, so there might be the potential for evidence of activity on the site. It might be architectural, so a place that has great architectural or artistic merit. Or it might have historic significance, so it might be associated with an important personal event in history. So, for example, you might have a little terraced house somewhere like Liverpool that has no architectural significance, but it's where John Lennon was born. So suddenly it has great historic significance. And Tettenhall Towers, of course, has significance in all of these areas, as we shall see. Now, you establish this significance by doing a lot of research, drawing together the information from various sources, and then that gives you the evidence to inform decision-making in the future. So as a heritage consultant, I try to anticipate what the local authority conservation officer will say, as they're the ones who have the final yes and no when making changes to listed buildings like this one. So that doesn't mean that I'm the person who says, no, you can't do that, this building's far too historic and significant. Sometimes I say that. But what I try to do is identify opportunities to enhance the historic fabric of the building and to communicate the stories of the people who lived here. So change can absolutely have a positive impact on a building. It's not always negative. Now, throughout my talk, I will just refer to the building for ease as the Towers, even though it wasn't known as the Towers until really quite late in the 1800s. Now, just be aware, I'm going to show you a lot of photos, and the ones that you see of the building as it stands now don't show the rooms in their best light. But they are honest photos. Now, many of the rooms that you'll see, particularly in the oldest part of the building, have had their plaster stripped back off the walls. They might have scaffolding poles in them, and they're still in the process of drying out. And that's mostly due to water ingress from Thornycroft's marvellously innovative drainage system, which often went directly through the building. So while you may get a surprise when you see the state of some of these rooms, It's for the best. They're being stabilised. And it will also help to give you an idea of the magnitude of the task facing the towers over the coming years. So let's go back almost 100 years prior to the Thornycroft's involvement. This is the Rock in the early 19th century, which just gives you an idea of the very rural landscape at the time. Now, even earlier than that, 1763, Georgian period, a landowner named Thomas Pearson bought a plot of land from the Foley family, who incidentally also owned Whitley Court near Worcester. This plot of land included an inn called the Hollybush, and Pearson built a house on that plot of land described as Grecian in style, and that was the earliest iteration of Tettenhall Towers. Let's just consider the Hollybush Inn. This is a map of Tettenhall from 1613, and here you can see where you've got the High Street and Upper Street, and even down here, which I like very much, you can see Henwood, which is where you've got Henwood Road now. And then here is a building roughly where the Towers is. In fact, if we superimpose a modern map on, it's pretty much where the Towers is. So it's possible that that building on the map is the Hollybush Inn. And so the origins of a building on this site are actually much earlier than we first thought. Now the question is, does any of that building remain today? Well, Thomas Thornycroft thought so. He said, Pearson erected a bungalow sort of dwelling tacked onto the old inn, the ancient and cosy tap room of which still forms the servants' hall. That's what he believed. Now we'll come back to that theory. I think Thornycroft may have misjudged the oldest part of the building. We'll come back to it. Back to the Pearsons. So Thomas Pearson died in 1796, and the house passed to his son, Judge John Pearson. He was born here at the Towers, and he became a very distinguished judge. And then it went to his grandson, General Thomas Pearson. Now, these later generations of Pearsons didn't necessarily live here, certainly not all the time, and they let the house to a series of quite distinguished tenants. The last of those tenants was a man named William Fleming Fryer. He was a landowner and a banker from Wolverhampton, and he lived here until 1851. We'll hear a little more of him later. Now, Colonel Thornycroft, as we know, was a man who was very proud of his achievements. He was very proud of the Towers, and helpfully for us, he documented everything that he did. We therefore have a plan of the Towers that he has annotated. So that red outline is Thornycroft's own hand, and that shows what he described as the old building. So therefore, what was owned by the Pearsons, built by the Pearsons, and potentially by the tenants as well. Now let's think again about that Hollybush Inn, which he said was part of the servants' hall. That's the servants' hall. All very good so far. In fact, if we extend that, you get a building with a cross passage, which is very typical of 17th century buildings. However, this plan shows how the building would have looked in 1851, the oldest part. So it's been through several iterations by then. So let's look at an earlier plan. This is a plan of the Towers from early 1800s. You can see there's the bay windows. This is sort of where the library is. And if we lay that onto a modern plan, I'm afraid it falls short of the servants' hall. So possibly not as Thornycroft believed. Now, old plans aren't necessarily to be relied upon entirely. The scale is a little bit hazy. So let's look at a modern plan. I think there's a more persuasive argument for the very oldest part of the Towers to be there instead. And that's mainly because of this wall. So in the Towers meeting room, that is the wall that goes through the middle of the room. It's got a column either side of it. And above the Towers meeting room is the room called the Colonel's bedroom. Now, during the works, we discovered a wall with a blocked up window. So that therefore shows that this, excuse my shaky hand, was once an external wall. So that's good evidence that there's definitely more than one phase of construction work going on, and then that is possibly the oldest part of the towers. Now, does it include the inn? It's impossible to say. I reckon if there's any aspects of that inn left, probably foundation level only, nothing that we're going to find today. Now let's have a look at the earliest sketch of the towers. This is from 1837. It's from the Pearsons' ownership, and that's from the Historic England Archive. So as we can see, the two larger towers haven't been built by this point, but it is very recognisable as the building we know today. It's got balustrading, it's got that Greek key detail there that we know very well. And it's got the very distinctive corner to the library, which I would say is probably a very early iteration of what the towers then looked like. But what this tells us importantly is that Thornycroft used these existing architectural details and ran with them. He was very respectful of this earliest form. Let's move forward to the next photo. So this is from the mid-19th century, and very frustratingly, we don't have an exact date for it. At this point, we have one tower, but no theatre yet. Again, on the next photo, roughly the same time, one tower, no theatre. So here's the important question. Who built the first tower? We always assume that Thornycroft was responsible for the construction of the actual towers. He was certainly responsible for the second one, but I think there's enough evidence to suggest that this tower, the archive tower, may be slightly earlier. I give you Exhibit A. Map evidence. So this evidence is from 1850, 3 years before Thornycroft's purchase. Just bear in mind this strange little indent here, which we will come back to. But importantly, I'd say that corner is distinctly rounded, almost as if it was a tower. Again, when overlaid with an aerial image, oh look, it corresponds with a tower. Exhibit B. Windows. This is a sash window. Sash windows are a fantastic indicator of age using various features, including horns. These are the horns on a window, and you can find horns on sash windows from about the late 1850s, 1860s onwards. Now, as your homework, this is a great game when you're out and about. Can you date a house from the horns on the sash windows? This is what I do when I'm on holiday, and this is why my husband finds me such a fascinating person. You can also date earlier sash windows by how far they're set back into the wall, and that comes from fire regulations after the Great Fire of London. But that's too much of a tangent for this talk. Now, if we look at the windows of the archive tower, no horns, archive tower. Not only does it not have any horns, they correspond with the other windows on the older part of the building, excuse the scaffolding, which also have no horns, therefore suggesting that these are earlier windows. If we look at the other tower, which we know was constructed by Thornycroft, horns on the windows. I know it's very tiny, but I hope you can see what I'm getting at. And again, they correspond with the other windows on the Victorian part of the building, with horns. Final piece of evidence, which is tangential, but important. You remember the final tenant before the Thornycrofts moved in? William Fleming Fryer. He went on to build Wergs Hall. Not too far away, another Italianate asymmetrical building with a few familiar features. Again, we've got balustrading and this porch with the columns and a tower. So I do wonder if in fact it was this last tenant who may have had more of an influence on the architectural details of the tower than we first realised. Now, architecturally, this brings us up to date with the Thornycroft family. There they are. The Thornycrofts had 9 children, 20 years between the oldest and the youngest. So on the front row, here we have Mrs. Jane Thornycroft, here we have Thomas Thornycroft, and that's all 9 of their children and various sons and daughters-in-law. They moved into the building as tenants in 1851, and then they purchased it in 1853. So as I said, I'd like to invite you on a virtual tour of the towers as it looked in 1891. The reason for that specific year is we have excellent floor plans for this year. Now, it's a bit far away for you to see, but all of those rooms are very accurately and nicely labelled. I'll give you a little minute to get your bearings. We are here. You came in this door, I think. Some of you came in where? This one? Yep. Well, you'll find out how important you are then having come in through that door. So the census for that year shows quite a small household. So at that point, Thomas Thornycroft was 68, Jane was 66, and they had 7 live-in servants. So we've got a cook, a lady's maid, 2 housemaids, a kitchen maid, a footman, and a groom. This was also the year that Thornycroft published his book of patents and inventions. Now, the room we are in now, in 1891, was still being used for concerts and entertainments and bazaars, but I would suspect maybe not so many as previous years, when the Thornycrofts were a bit younger and all their children were at home and freely available to participate. So I think it might have been an older and more sedate household by this time, but as we'll see, the names of the rooms tell a story of a much busier time. So, as we come through the door, you must know if you're coming in that way, sir, you're in a very privileged position. Only the Thornycrofts' personal guests would enter the towers through this door. So here we have the hall, and then we've got a lovely party outside. Footman and the groom. And then this would be his Thornycroft study. These little sort of semicircular details are interesting to note. They pop up all around the building. They're a very common motif. So there was a separate door. If you were coming to this part of the building as a concert goer, as an audience member, you wouldn't go near that door. You had a whole separate door of your own. So this area of the building, not only is the oldest area of the building, it's the family area. So once you go into the building, we'll go through the door on the right, into the drawing room. So you must imagine, very long time ago, the room was half the size, so that external wall I was talking about was there. But that was before the Thornycrofts' time. The Thornycrofts will always have known it the size it is now. Now his granddaughter, that's the author Ellen Thornycroft Fowler, she wrote a novel about a building called Tettenhall Towers, which included an ideal country drawing room on one side of the hall, a long, low, sunny room made sunnier by plentiful white paint and a pale blue carpet and curtains. Now, I've no idea, Chris, if the decor choice was inspired by that description, but it's certainly very apt. If we went through the door opposite into this small room here, you find yourself in the Colonel's library and study with attached WC. This is where we encounter the first of the Colonel's inventions. So this was his boot warming apparatus, which we know was kept in his study and would be attached to the fireplace that is still in there today. If we go upstairs, the Colonel's bedroom. The Colonel's bedroom is not labelled as such on the plan, it just says bedroom, but it's always been known as the Colonel's bedroom. It's certainly the grandest, so it makes sense that it probably was. So we know this is where that external wall with the blocked up window was found. There's also the beautiful plaster dome ceiling. And there's been a window in this room that has appeared and disappeared many times. So if we look, this is one of the earliest photos, no window. Oh, window. And theatre. And then again, this looks like it's in school ownership times, no window again. So it's come and gone. Also upstairs, you've got these other bedrooms, which are various other family bedrooms and dressing rooms. And one of those bedrooms is labelled as Miss Thornycroft's bedroom. And at that point, that was their youngest daughter, Florence, who was 24 in 1891. And as for Mrs. Thornycroft, who I believe must have been a woman of great patience with such a husband, had a suite of rooms. She had a bedroom, a dressing room, and a boudoir. This is Mrs. Thornycroft as a young woman. So different doors through this suite of rooms have been blocked up at various points. You can see we've got one here, one here. That layout has been changed a lot. And then we had a little mystery. What was this? So you've got this area of darkened brickwork and there's some timber remnants. And on the plan, that corresponds, you can't quite see it, there's a small rectangle there that's marked boots. And we think this is the location of another invention. So this was the boot and shoe case invented by Thornycroft, which had hot water pipes running through the case to prevent the boots becoming damp or mouldy. So it's very nice to be able to put the inventions to the plan and plot out where they actually were. Now in 1891, the Thornycroft children were all grown up, but in previous years, much of this floor was dedicated to their children. So there was a passage directly from Mrs. Thornycroft's room to the night nursery. That's the night nursery. And then directly opposite was the day nursery. From the day nursery, this area you can see here is a blocked up door, which led to this room, which I think makes it a strong contender for the governess's room, who was mentioned on the 1861 census. This is youngest daughter Florence when she was a little girl. Now, if you went out of the nursery, up the stairs to the tower, that was their schoolroom. Imagine having your schoolroom in a tower. My boys would get nothing done. They'd just be playing castles. I find it interesting that on this 1891 plan, these rooms are still retaining the labels of 20 years, 30 years earlier, day nursery, night nursery, schoolroom, which makes me wonder, perhaps that's where the grandchildren stayed when they came as well. Now, if we go downstairs, let's see what's for dinner. We've got the dining room, the conservatory, and the veranda, which are now all part of the library. There have been a lot of changes in this part of the building. This room has changed an awful lot. The granddaughter, Ellen Thornycroft Fowler, she described the dining room as a room of mysterious nooks and crannies, rendered more mysterious by furniture and panelling of fine carved black oak, followed by a conservatory of orange trees and marble fountains. Very different to how it looks now. There's also a very nice detail you can spot in the library, which is some painted glass in one of the corners, and that reflects the architectural detail that you see in other areas of the building as well. Now, a dining room would be nothing without those who cook and serve the meals. So let's have a look at the servants' rooms. These are normally thought of as below stairs, but at the towers, there is no below at that point. The servants' rooms are crowded into the middle of the ground floor. So here's the servants' corridor, which strangely features what looks like external windows. And those are here. Now, if you remember that plan from 1850, that passage is there. So originally that was a sort of external serviceway, which has been blocked in a little bit later. Something else to spot in that corridor is this nice curved corner. If you see a curved corner, you know you're in the service area. A curved corner allowed greater ease of movement, greater visibility, especially if you're carrying trays, laundry, coal. So when you do your visits to National Trust places, when you see a curved corner, servants area. So let's see if we can find the housekeeper and the butler. This is the butler's pantry. So where food would have had its last stage of preparation, where you might have stored more expensive items. That's how it looks now. And then you have the housekeeper's room just here. I hope you're ready for this. And that's how it looks now. So you can see it's got a blocked up fireplace. This square here is this window here. And this curve is a bit of a mystery. Now, most of the servants would have slept in the attic, certainly the female servants would have done. But one lucky soul, the footman, slept down here so as to be near to the front door. This was his room. In 1891, this was 20-year-old Robert Rudge, and this was his bedroom. Now, unfortunately, that room has got a bathroom above it, which had a leak. So it's not in the best repair. But even how it is now, I don't think there'd have been space for Robert Roach to lie down without twisting himself around a corner. Now, the servants all ate together in the servants' hall. That's here. If you remember, that was the part that Thornycroft believed was the oldest part of the building. But of course, the biggest room in the servants' quarters, that's what it's full of now, costumes. The biggest room was the kitchen. That's now the gym. But you can see, again, it's got the fireplace. And here where you've got a beam across, this is where it was divided up into sculleries and pantries and things like that. And then this bit behind the kitchen, that was open all the way up to the ceiling because that was to allow the smell of the cooking to escape through the vents. Now, if we go up to the attic, we can find the servants' bedrooms. So they were here in the doll's house. You can see you've got their little fireplaces. There's some very narrow access through, and some of them have been wallpapered over several times. But a couple of other intriguing things in the attic. This is the carpenter's shop directly over the theatre. And there's also some water tanks up there, which may or may not be to do with the cascade. Now, you've seen where the family lives, you've seen where the servants live. Let's pretend we're taking in a concert. So rather than where you might have come in today, this was the main entrance for the theatre, and that is labelled on the plan as music room entrance. It was never really called the theatre by the Thornycrofts. This was the music room, the hall, or sometimes just the big room. And as you came in, you'd find a huge space with a gallery of guest bedrooms above us. So if you look above your heads, where you can see that very long rectangle stretching the length of the room, that was one great big void. It went up another space, and you could have looked up and seen, come back. You'd have seen this row of bedrooms. That is up there. You've got the fireplace. That's there, in the pub. It's now the bar for various events. And then above it, where you've got that oak seat now, that is that. Although it's missing that carved panel, which I think was sold. I think that is the only piece of furniture left in the towers from the Thornycrofts' time of residence. So it's very precious, Chris. Look after it. You can also see, either side of that settle, you've got alcoves. You can see here they would have had suits of armour in them. And those suits of armour actually came from Alton Towers. And then you've still got the carved doors either side. So this is my view towards all of you now. So as you can see, it very rarely had rows of seats. It did sometimes, depending on what was going on. But in this picture, you've got lots of tables and chairs. You can see the balcony as it is today, but with all the curtains open. And that's another view looking toward the fireplace. And you can really see all the different uses for the room. You can see all of it was like a little museum, really. All the pieces of armour, all the stags' heads, all the taxidermy. The oak panelling that's around the first floor gallery, that actually came from St. Peter's Church in Wolverhampton. It wasn't in St. Peter's Church for very long because it was donated by Thornycroft's father, George Thornycroft. And then not many years later, the church was having some renovations and his son, Thomas Thornycroft, said, I'll have that. I know where that would look good. So what might you come to see here? You might come to see a play. So this is some of the Thornycroft family all dressed up. I think that's the man himself. He's looking particularly like you there, David. You might come to a concert. You might come to a lecture. Now, admittedly, this doesn't show a lecture, but it shows your view right now. So if those curtains were open, you can still see to the back, to the windows. There's the proscenium arch. And I am informed that some of this panelling is still underneath. You might also have come to dance. Isn't that lovely? You might have come to skate. You might have come to play badminton or attend a charity bazaar. So it was always intended to be a multi-purpose room. Now, very handily, through all the many newspaper reports and concert programmes produced about the entertainments at the Towers, they actually help us to chart the building work. So when the Thornycrofts moved in the 1850s, outdoor events were advertised. So he often welcomed his workforce. They had to stay in the grounds. They weren't coming into the house. But they could have entertainments in the grounds. From 1866 onwards, events were held in the racquet court, which was in the grounds. Afterwards, he had theatricals in the billiard room. And then from the 1870s onwards, events took place in here. So it's evidence like this that really helps us to chart how the building was constructed over time. Now, if you attended an event in the ground, you might expect to see 500 Sunday school children or 3,000 of the Thornycroft employees while he still had his business and their families. But if you were in here, you were with the great and good of the Midlands. This is where we had the Manders and the Giffords and other names that we're still familiar with today. Of course, you can also expect to find several Thornycroft inventions here. So the floor is laid on springs in order to create a better surface for dancing and skating. That system is literally beneath our feet today, surviving almost intact. We know we had the waterfall, the cascade which fell onto the stage. It fell into a water tank below, which was then used to clear out the drains. The scenery included movable panoramas, and the fire over there even had a fan attached to fan the flames to make a better fire. And we found the site of that motor underneath it. So again, we're working out how to cite all of these inventions. Now, after you've attended a concert, if you're very lucky, the Colonel might invite you for a game of billiards. Now, if you've been to Whittick Manor and seen the billiard room there, that gives you a very good idea of what it might have looked like. So this is the Colonel and his son-in-law. This is a raised bank of seating, very similar to at Whittick Manor. That's the same view as from today. And this is the original panelling. And you can see on the sort of adjoining wall here, you can see where that panelling gets stepped up. So it's very special to still have that, even with the horrible blue paint on it. It's still very important to have it. But there's a mystery attached to this billiard room, because Thornycroft described it as, it's not just a billiard room, it's a lower and upper billiard room which open into each other, the floor under the top table being removed. Now, if we look at the ceiling of the lower billiard room, we can see there's all sorts going on here. We've got a few theories about how an upper and lower billiard room with a removable floor might have worked. But we're also open to suggestions, answers on a postcard. So let's have a look upstairs at the guest bedrooms. So as you can see, a lot of them are very small, especially these ones here. But they would have had a wonderful view. Literally, you would have come out of your room and looked down here into the music room. Now, a lot of these bedrooms were turned into classrooms when this void was filled in. So if we have a look at the corridor, imagine that this corridor is this corridor, and these rooms are these rooms. Literally, that door and that door is that door and that door. And then these rooms on the other side are where these have been built out into classrooms. So you can even look inside these tiny bedrooms today, where they are tiddly little music practice rooms, perfect for practicing your music. But as a house guest, I think you'd have been squashed. Now, the rooms at either corner give us a clue about who exactly was using those rooms. So in one corner, we have the young lady's boudoir, as labelled. And in the other corner, we have the young gentleman's sitting room. Now, I think with 9 grown-up children, the Colonel made provision for their friends to come and stay. So just imagine, if you're the young gentleman, basically this tower is your domain. You've got your young gentleman's sitting room. Below you was the armoury. Above you is another bedroom. And you had this wonderful dark panelling which came from Ludlow Castle. The Colonel was a great collector of anything that tickled his fancy as he travelled the Midlands, I think. And I've got a lovely picture of what I assume is the same room. This is from the 1991 prospectus. which I think is the same room, which I quite like. And then this was the young lady's boudoir, which even today, with the plaster stripped, you still get a sense of, well, this is a lovely open space. It's very light and airy. It's got beautiful views over the garden. So I'd like to come to the end with two of those young ladies. This is Florence, and 10 years older than her, this is Eleanor. So after their parents died, Eleanor and Florence continued to live at the Towers. They never married, and in the 1921 census records them living here with 6 servants. And they continued to use the Towers Theatre for good causes. So during World War II, entertainments were held in this room for wives and mothers of prisoners of war, and for women workers from the Wolverhampton factories. The stables were actually requisitioned by the council as an emergency mortuary, although there's no record of them ever being used. So Eleanor died in 1941, and then Florence was the last remaining one who sold the Towers to the college in 1943. Now, Florence was a remarkable woman. She's my hero. She was the first female member of Staffordshire County Council and the first female county alderman. She started the British Red Cross Voluntary Aid Detachment in Staffordshire, and that's her in her uniform, and that's Eleanor's VAD card. She was awarded the Red Cross Medal and the Queen Elizabeth Medal for hospitality to refugees and Belgian soldiers. She also received an OBE for political and public services in Staffordshire, and I don't think we talk about her enough. So the Towers really was a home of extraordinary people. Now, you're all far more familiar with Tettenhall Towers than I am. You've studied here and you've spent your childhood here, and if you can spot your name on here, you get a prize, or you have to see Mr. McAllister afterwards. But I hope, even though you know it so well, I hope you've learned something new, whether that's the history of the Towers before the Thornycrofts, or where the Colonel warmed his boots, or how to correctly work out the age of a sash window. So I want to leave you with 2 quotations, which I like very much. The first is from Midland Weekly News in 1885. Tettenhall Towers is no ordinary place. It has an interest wholly its own to the historian, the archaeologist, the botanist, and the scientist. These are strong enough titles to recommendation, even without the remaining fact that it is the home of so popular a man as Lieutenant Colonel Thornycroft. And the second is from Ellen Thornycroft Fowler. Certainly, there never was such a house for surprises as Tettenhall Towers. Thank you very much.
Alexandra, thank you so much. That was so interesting and really brought the place to life, and the people who actually lived here as well. I learned an awful lot. I hope you did too. Leave it to the headmaster.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Beach. My big thanks to Jackie before she scuttles off for so many of the arrangements for this evening. Thank you so much. To Mr. Beach for his excellent comparing as usual. We hugely appreciate it. Thank you very much, Tim. It's really appreciated. Thank you. To you, the audience, who have supported this event so well, it's incredibly heartwarming that you come here this evening from all different areas, make the journey, and to revisit your old school, to visit your children's school, because you have an interest in Towers and Tettenhall College. You are always warmly welcome. And I can assure you all that we are much kinder to our staff and students these days than some of the historical memories may suggest, so be reassured. But my last thanks really does go to Alexandra for an inspiring and truly fascinating insight into the building that we're in right now. Thank you so much for your generosity. We have a small gift for you. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexandra Dziegiel.